Today, we're diving into Toni Morrison's masterpiece, Beloved, and we're going to use it as a kind of guide, to really dissect the anatomy of racism, not just as simple hate, but as this deep, calculated, soul-crushing system.
So let's kick things off with a quote that is really the key to the whole novel. Definitions belong to the definers. Wow, that one line, it just captures everything about power and control, doesn't it? It's all about how language itself can be turned into a weapon. And believe me, this is the idea we're going to circle back to again and again.
All right, so here's the roadmap. First, we'll look at racism as a system. Then, we'll get into the creepy science used to justify it. We'll talk about how words become weapons, tear down the whole myth of the good slave owner, and finally, we'll look at the scars left on the inside.
Okay, first up, what's so important to get right away is that Morrison isn't just pointing fingers at a few bad apples. No, she's showing us something much bigger. She's illustrating how racism was this all-encompassing, calculated system designed to do way more than just physical harm.
And this is the absolute key. We're not just talking about whips and chains here. This was an intellectual assault. The main goal? To literally build a reality where a whole group of people could be psychologically, and get this, scientifically, proven to be less than human.
So how do you show that idea in a story? Well, Morrison gives us one of literature's most terrifying characters. This is where we meet the school teacher. And what makes him so scary is that he represents this cold, rational kind of racism, one that uses logic and science to justify pure brutality.
Yeah, his method is what will give you chills. He's not the type to just shout slurs. Instead, he walks around the farm with a notebook, just quietly observing the enslaved people like they're insects in a jar. He's collecting data, and you just know it's for something awful.
And then his project becomes horrifyingly clear. He tells his nephews to draw a line down a page and list the human characteristics on one side and the animal characteristics on the other. Can you imagine? For Sethe, who overhears this, it's worse than any whip. It's a so-called scientific mission to erase her very soul.
And boom, that brings us right back to our main theme. Definitions belong to the definers. See, the power of that notebook wasn't the ink on the page. It was the power to define what's real. The true, awful strength of this whole system was being able to say, these people are animals, and by doing so, giving everyone moral permission to treat them that way.
And what happens next is brutally simple. If you define someone as livestock, you treat them like livestock. The violence of the idea, that intellectual violence, leads straight to the physical violence of reality.
And the book doesn't hold back in showing us what that looks like. It's not just that Paul D is silenced. He has an iron horse bit, a bit forced into his mouth. It's not just that Seth is assaulted. She's milked by those nephews, a disgusting act that steals her motherhood and reduces her to a cow. That's the definition made flesh and blood.
Then Morrison does something brilliant. She takes this old racist trope, the idea of a jungle or a savagery inside black people, and she just flips it on its head. She argues that this so-called savagery wasn't born in them. It was planted there by the sheer horror of slavery. The jungle they were so afraid of was just a reflection of their own brutal world.
Which brings us to a really dangerous myth that Morrison just tears apart. The whole idea of a good or kind slave owner. And she does it by showing us the two different masters at the Sweet Home Plantation.
So first you have Mr. Garner. He let the men carry guns, he trusted their decisions. He probably thought he was a pretty decent guy. But here's the thing, they were still his property. His kindness wasn't a right, it was a permission slip that could be torn up at any moment. And the second he died and school teachers showed up, poof, that illusion of safety was gone. It's a brutal lesson. The system is always bigger than one person's good intentions.
And that leads us to the final and maybe most tragic part of all this. What happens when you're bombarded with these definitions your entire life? Well, you start to believe them. The racism gets inside your own head.
This is Paul D's personal hell. After what school teacher did to him, his sense of self is just shattered. He's haunted by this question, right? Am I a man? Or was I only a man because another man, Mr. Garner, said I was? He's fighting to figure out who he is without needing that validation from a white man.
And it's only when you understand that you can begin to understand Sethi's horrific, unthinkable choice. Killing her own child, it was her ultimate tragic way of rejecting school teacher's definition. In her mind, death was better. It was a mercy,
compared to letting her children live a life where they would be defined, treated, and bred like animals. In the most twisted way possible, she was trying to save their humanity.
So, when you boil it all down, this is what it's about. For everyone who survives in this book, the real battle isn't over. The core conflict is the fight to reclaim their own minds. It's this epic, monumental struggle to just shake off the world's brutal definitions and finally claim ownership of that freed self.
And that's the question the novel leaves hanging in the air, long after you've closed the cover. It's a question that just echoes, forcing us to look at the deepest, ugliest legacy of a system built to destroy people from the inside out. So, how do you reclaim a self that an entire society was built to deny? How do you rebuild a soul that the world was designed, intellectually and physically, to insist never even existed?